Listo. Bueno, iniciamos entonces con la sesión de hoy. Voy a dejar de transmitir, de compartir. Bueno, no puedo dejar de compartirlo. No, muy buenos días a todas, a todes y a todos. Les damos la bienvenida al Seminario Interacciones Multiespecies, tejiendo vínculos en un mundo compartido. Es un espacio que nace como la continuidad de los coloquios multiespecies realizados en 2024 y 2025 en la UAM Iztapalapa. Aquellos encuentros pusieron en evidencia la relevancia del tema en un momento marcado por el antropoceno, donde las transformaciones
Hay,
ambientales, ¿sí?
hay un eco.
No sé cómo solucionarlo.
Cerrar el micrófono de John, tal vez.
Ajá, ok. ¿Me escuchan mejor, sin eco? Bueno, voy a reiniciar con la presentación de este seminario. Pues bueno, este seminario surge como la continuidad de los coloquios que realizamos en 2024 y 2025 en la UAM Iztapalapa. Aquellos encuentros pues pusieron en evidencia la relevancia del tema en un mundo marcado por el antropoceno, donde las transformaciones ambientales y las disputas por la vida reconfiguran nuestras preguntas sobre agencia, interdependencia y responsabilidad. Este seminario surge pues no solo como una extensión, sino como una transformación. Pasamos del formato de coloquio a una plataforma sostenida de diálogo y formación. Apostamos por el tiempo largo, por la conversación que se profundiza sesión tras sesión, por la posibilidad de construir comunidad académica más allá del evento puntual. Nos proponemos abrir un diálogo transcontinental entre perspectivas del sur global y del norte global, partiendo de la premisa de que todo conocimiento emerge desde posiciones históricas y geopolíticas específicas. Buscamos propiciar un encuentro entre trayectorias intelectuales que, al ponerse en relación, se tensionan y se transforman. Más allá de la estructura puntual de cada sesión, el horizonte es sostener un intercambio que contraste preguntas y metodologías, atendiendo tanto a las asimetrías en la producción de conocimiento como a las posibilidades de interlocución crítica. Este espacio quiere ser, ante todo, un lugar para pensar juntos, para escuchar con atención, ensayar conceptos, incomodarnos productivamente y sostener preguntas abiertas. Nos interesa que aquí se encuentren trayectorias consolidadas y miradas emergentes, que se crucen disciplinas, que dialoguen experiencias de campo con reflexiones teóricas. Agradecemos profundamente a las y los ponentes que han aceptado participar en esta edición, así como a quienes se han inscrito desde distintos países e instituciones, y a todas las personas cuyo trabajo hace posible esta transmisión. Esperamos que este seminario no sea solo una serie de sesiones, sino la consolidación de una red de trabajo que continúe más allá de este año. Sean bienvenidas, que este espacio nos permita tejer con paciencia y rigor nuevas formas de pensar y practicar la vida en común en el mundo que compartimos. Gracias. Bueno, vamos a dar vamos a dar la bienvenida a John Hartigan. Francisco es el moderador el día de hoy, entonces, pues bueno, podemos iniciar la sesión.
Muchas gracias, Anaid. Yo soy Francisco Vergara da Silva. Les hablo desde Ciudad Universitaria, en Ciudad de México, como parte del equipo que está acompañando a Anaid en la organización de este ciclo. También quiero darle la bienvenida a Alejandro Fujigaki, que es nuestro otro cómplice muy importante en esta organización y en pensar en el diseño de esta actividad. Y bueno, también pues la bienvenida a todas las personas que veo que ya están conectadas en la videollamada de Zoom que estamos realizando, y además, según parece, pues está ocurriendo la transmisión en vivo por YouTube de manera simultánea, y sin contratiempos. Esperemos que así siga. Bueno, pues como moderador de la sesión me corresponde leer una semblanza biográfica breve de John, a quien conocemos desde hace algunos años. John es un buen amigo, una de las personas más connotadas en el campo de la antropología, etnografía multiespecies en el mundo. Él trabaja en los Estados Unidos. Entonces voy a hacer esta lectura formal de su perfil biográfico. John Hartigan Jr. es un profesor de antropología en la Universidad de Texas, con sede en la ciudad de Austin. Él ha sido el autor de varios libros sobre etnografía multiespecies que están basados principalmente en su trabajo de campo realizado en España y en México. El libro titulado Shaving the Beasts, Wild Horses and Ritual in Spain, publicado en 2020 y este título podríamos traducirlo aproximadamente como Rasurando a las Bestias, eh, Caballos Salvajes y Ritual en España. Examina el ritual llamado Rapa das Bestas, que se realiza en Galicia y que se ha realizado anualmente por aproximadamente 500 años. Luego hay otro libro también importante, conocido bastante aquí en México, publicado en 2017. En inglés llevó el título de Care of the Species, Races of Corn and the Sciences of Plant Biodiversity. Una traducción aproximada podría ser El cuidado de las especies, dos puntos, razas de maíz y las ciencias de la biodiversidad de las plantas. Estuvo basado en trabajo de campo en los laboratorios de genómica de plantas y diferentes especies que representa la biodiversidad mexicana, en un trabajo que se hizo en Langevio. Es un laboratorio que pertenece al CINVESTAB, está ubicado en Guanajuato, y también en ese libro se cuentan historias que tienen que ver con el trabajo de campo que John realizó en los jardines botánicos de Madrid, Barcelona y Valencia. Hay un trabajo anterior que se llama Aesop's Anthropology, a Multispecies Approach, de 2015, una antropología de Esopo, una aproximación multiespecies, que es, como lo define el mismo John, un tratado especulativo sobre varias modalidades de pensamiento sobre especies. Y finalmente, John nos comenta en el documento que nos compartió que acaba de publicar una novela de este género peculiar que se suele llamar en inglés Dark Academia, acerca, como dice en el documento, de los fantasmas en su departamento académico, es lo que se entiende, ¿no? Ahí en la Universidad de Texas. Se llama The Last Cohort, algo así como la última cohorte, donde lo que hace es una descripción o una novelación, digamos, de la investigación basado en el trabajo que hicieron algunos colegas de John en Texas sobre la cosmología maya antigua, para mostrar lo que podría suceder si algunos guerreros mayas sacrificados resucitaran y fueran modificados por una inteligencia artificial, tema bastante de moda, y entonces fuesen liberados en línea. Y también hay una parte de la historia que tiene que ver con un trío de estudiantes graduados, no sé si de doctorado o de otro grado, que encuentran o se enfrentan a esta precariedad de la academia, conforme también están haciéndole frente a algunos peligros en el inframundo maya, Xibalba. Bueno, pues sin más, te damos la palabra, John. The floor is yours, John. And we are really pleased to have you here to start this cycle. Thank you very much for being with us.
Gracias mucho. Saludos a todos. Estoy emocionado por nuestra sesión de hoy. Al principio quiero agradecer mucho a Anaid Ortiz por ofrecerme participar en este seminario. También a Francisco Vergara Silva, moderador de hoy. Francisco, yo recuerdo bien nuestra previa reunión virtual en 2022, el conversatorio en la UNAM con Leticia Durand. A ambos les digo muchas gracias por su esfuerzo en organizar este evento. Lamentable, no hablo español bastante bien como para abordar los temas de hoy. No es que sean complicados, sino que simplemente no he mantenido mi facilidad de español. Lo siento. Y entonces voy a empezar en inglés. Bien, gracias. Y voy a compartir ahora mi pantalla. Sí, ¿se puede verlo? Bien, bien.
Se ve bien. Si la puedes ampliar, if you can make the image slightly larger with the button at the bottom, John. But if
Okay.
you can't, that perfect. Now we can see only the image of each
Okay.
slide. Thank you very
Bien,
much.
bien, 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 bien. I'll start by saying that when I accepted this invitation last year, I did not know that I would be talking about this topic today. This is something that came up quite recently. An editor from a press in November asked me to write a textbook about multi-species ethnography. And so this is the first time I'm trying this out. You're the first audience for this presentation. And I very much look forward to your questions, thoughts, suggestions when I conclude the presentation. And I want to highlight here my email address, and I want to encourage everyone to feel free to contact me with questions, again, suggestions, thoughts, and I'm happy to share any of the articles that I'll be referencing today if you have a difficulty accessing them through your institution and such. So, please do contact me, and I will respond. Okay, so this is the working title of this new book, and this is based not just on the field work that I've done, but the class that I teach. I teach a class on animal studies, multi-species ethnography. It meets at 1 o'clock today, so I'm going to tell them about this session when I'm done. I'm very excited to share it with. So much of what's coming out of what's featured in the presentation is based on my engagement in the classroom and with understanding that we learn best by teaching. And I will be talking about how to learn techniques of observation that are similar to what ethologists use. And they can be picked up quite easily, but it's facilitated by engaging students in learning to do these observations as well. That's my overview. So today, my whole talk, there's a very simple premise. It's simply this, that multi-species ethnographers need to engage in ethological observations. By ethological observations, I'm talking about the way natural scientists have gone into the field for decades and systematically observed animal behavior. This is where we can really open up the scope of ethnographic research. Now, there's all kinds of questions, uncertainties, etc., that follow from this premise, but the premise is very simple, and I will only be elaborating on it by going through a series of examples. And I have done this myself. This is how I worked with the horses in Spain. This is how I learned it, and now through teaching my students how to do this, I'm kind of getting a little bit better, perhaps. I worked out the theoretical basis for this convergence of ethology and ethnography in this particular article. So all the kind of intellectual issues, the big analytical questions, I deal with them there, and I will be happy to send you a copy of that. I just want to note, since we're thinking of Latin America broadly, I also have done some field work in Peru, and this was published in a co-authored authored piece, and I got to try out some of the techniques there with corridas de toros in Peru. I'm going to immediately go to this topic because it's so important, and it has yet to have a real clear impact in the social sciences, in anthropology, geography, and sociology, where people are studying animals. And this has become a commonplace assumption that animals have culture too. And when I was a very young professor and teaching my introduction to cultural anthropology, I insisted, no, 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 only humans have culture. And that turns out not to be true. And this opens up just great potential because we can think of animals not simply as representations or figures in discourse, but entities out there that lead parallel social lives to we humans. And it's hard to overstate how emphatic this finding is. There's no doubt, they're saying, and this is in the journal Science, and it's not just the mammals, the primates, but it's marine species, it's a range of invertebrates, and this recognition has great significance beyond just the intellectual concern. When we are thinking about how to conserve species, and we're thinking about their overall general welfare, their social well-being, their social lives, their cultural aspects are really crucial to the success of these kinds of programs. So you can read this on your own. Again, it's quite well established, but it has yet to make much of an impact in the field of multi-species ethnography that I've seen. I'm going to draw a point of contrast with some other methodological approaches. And this is one that's just been published, so I take it to be quite current. And the first thing I think of, this is a difficult title. It's hard for me to grasp, what's at stake here. And I think that there's a lot of convolution when we're trying to articulate methods. And this is reflected in the author's work, very cautious, emphasizing positionality and reflexivity. And that really is limited. It's a limited basis to extend the scope of ethnography, I feel. We have these critical tools, the critical tools for analysis, power. We love to talk about power. Representations, these are social representations in discourse, the role of language. Those techniques, those analytics are inadequate for extending ethnographic observations of animals. We need to move beyond these, and I can talk about that more at length. Another approach, and you will hear more about this from my dear colleague, Eben Kirksey, who's very into the artistic side of things. We can do things creatively to try to capture the feeling state of being in relation to an animal, but I don't have much confidence in this. We can think about creative styles, but this really doesn't get us outside of our fellow colleagues in the humanities. And we would like a wider audience of the public in general, but I think certainly our colleagues in the sciences as well. So I don't have much faith in this. So this is what I offer instead, in contrast. And this is the current subtitle for the textbook. And I'm going to go through the table of contents to show you the overall scope, but I will only concentrate on this first portion of the book, and I will talk about the rest of it later. So the chapters in this first part are behavior, habitat, life histories, and sociality. And when I sent this to the publisher, she says, "What is this? Is this a science book?" No. These are scientific concepts, but we can work with them ethnographically, and I will explain that in detail. The book opens with these fundamental units of analysis, analytical frames. And then I go in to describe or discuss a series of species that are on the forefront of research on animal cultures. These are coyotes, horses, elephants, primates broadly, and cetaceans, the orcas, the whales, the dolphins. Each of these taxa are characterized by having a great deal of social learning. They observe each other behaving. They learn behaviors from each other. So these are species that are quite proximate to ours, humans, and our involvement with them will reflect their cultural and social dimensions. The last portion of the book is concerned with how we apply this. And animal welfare is a huge topic, and I'm thinking particularly of audiences in the European Union, where it's very well established. Many of the criteria for judging the well-being of an animal in captivity turn on its social life, its social well-being. And this is something that we can actually observe and produce data on and engage with. Human-wildlife conflict, huge topic of concern. There are lots of projects on it. Very few ethnographers get involved in this, but we can do this with a basis of actually observing the animals and not just observing the observers as we have kind of done in the past. Wildlife conservation, there's been a big shift in conservation away from a model that was focused on, well, we have a gene pool and we have to preserve this gene pool, failing to realize that with species like elephants, for instance, if you don't preserve the old matriarch, then they lose all of their cultural knowledge and they are unable to migrate. They are unable to socially reproduce. So the role of animal cultures is being recognized increasingly in conservation, and certainly with urban species that I'll be talking about. So this is the overall scope of the book. I'm going to just concentrate on the basics, and we can discuss the other two sections following my talk. So observing behavior. This is what I want to encourage. This is what made my ethnography in Spain successful, I feel, was that I was able to go from thinking about, well, how are the humans representing these horses that they're shaving, to what's the social impact of this ritual on the horses. The fundamental basis for doing behavioral observation is an ethogram. And you can check this out. All these are hyperlinks that you should find accessible. And the ethogram is just a catalog listing every observable behavior of a particular species. So you start with an ethogram, and I used an ethogram of the horses, and I could understand what it means when their ears are pitching forward, certain vocalizations, how they position themselves. There's an enormous stockpile of knowledge about these kinds of species. We don't have to start from scratch. Often with the artistic method approach, they're just trying to invent things. But wait, there's so much knowledge out there, and it's fairly accessible. It can be a little bit cumbersome to access, but once you do, then you have, oh, I see, this is that behavior. I can see that behavior, etc. Yeah, enormous resource. So starting with squirrels, because they're everywhere in cities, they're very easy to study, and this is it's a hyperlink to the Animal Diversity website, and this is a huge stockpile of knowledge about species in a very accessible mode. I encourage people to check it out. And here's our little friend here, the squirrel. And so you can find online these catalogs. And I'm going to just come out of the mode here for a moment and go to the website and see if I can share that. Share. Here we are. Yeah. Okay, maybe that's not going to, okay, share. Yeah. Yes. So here is the common squirrel behaviors, and they have videos that show you, what it looks like when the squirrel is foraging, when it resting, fairly straightforward, etc. Grooming, very, very important. So these are resources that we can use ourselves, but also importantly direct our students towards. And let's see, there. This other organization, I won't go to it because it's a bit cumbersome, but it's a program funded by the National Science Foundation, and it's classroom techniques for doing squirrel observations, but they're also creating a very large data set collaboratively that you can participate in, your students can participate in. There's some 60 species of squirrels in North America, and they're compiling data on many of them, and they have online forms that the students can fill out to do their observations and send them in. It's really quite an impressive organization. It's a little bit difficult to find the squirrel ethogram. You have to, this is open access, but you need to kind of register with them through Google. If you can't find the ethogram, I've provided a direct link for it there. And the squirrels are all over in El DF, they're in all the big parks there. That's where this picture was apparently taken in Chapultepec. So go out, check them out, take your ethograms, your sheets, and start observing behavior. So squirrels are a good start, but what we are interested in broadly is social activity, social species, and squirrels aren't terribly social. So they're good to start with, but then you want to move beyond that. And the next best species is, of course, our companion, a similarly hyper-social species, dogs. And so I send my students out to dog parks, and I have them do observations there. And not only are they observing the dogs, but the dogs' interactions with the humans. And this is very good training, very good basis for building this up. There's a very developed dog ethogram. It's got some 177 distinct behaviors. This is compiled by the Dog Lab in Kolkata. This is a very good resource. You can access that ethogram. This is Anita Banerjee's project, and it's very well funded, and they do a lot of interesting research on free-ranging dogs, feral dogs. And this is where things become more interesting for us, because what you begin to see with dogs are affiliative behaviors, and I'm going to talk at length about these. These are when conspecifics perform closeness. They collapse distance. Perhaps they have contact, or perhaps they are just proximate. This is a very complicated behavior. At one level, it's intuitive to us because we are a social species, and you can see, oh yes, they're socializing. They're engaged in affiliative behaviors. But affiliative behaviors were not included in the foundational work to establish ethograms. And so let me talk about that now. So affiliative gestures, this is what I learned to observe with the horses. So here they're allo grooming. They're grooming each other. Where a squirrel might groom itself, its tail, its ears, with horses, you see them actually grooming each other, getting that hard to reach spot behind the neck there. Naso, when they make contact with the nose, and there's a lot of olfactory exchange occurring here, chemical, sensory, etc. And then when they just stand side by side, the tail of the other keeps the flies off of the face of its partner. So this is an affiliative behavior. They only do it with individuals that they're very close to, literally and figuratively. So when ethology started, and Tinbergen established the kind of four principles of behavior, it was a very narrow view of behavior. And they were largely not interested in the sociality of species. So there's a bias in ethology, and we need to kind of work with or against that variously. They defined behavior as just discrete acts. They wanted things that were succinct. An affiliative behavior is more extended in time, unambiguous. Everybody would agree that squirrel is resting, or that squirrel is eating. This was the priority. Very clear motor patterns and short, narrow segments of activity and behaviors that could be linked to a function. Okay, this is feeding, this is maintenance, this is aggression, this is mating, etc. With social interactions, it's almost the opposite at every stage. They take much longer to play out over time. They're extended in time. They change by context. So the ways two horses might be interacting at one moment will look a little bit different than how they might act in another setting, a different setting. So context matters. And it's a relationship. It's just the antithesis of this kind of discrete activity. It involves another. And so these things are there. They're subtle. But there are telltale features like proximity, posture, and orientation, but they are not reducible to a very clear or certain function. So there are challenges for us in doing this. The bias in ethology is towards functional analysis. That's what their funding is set up to do, to show the function of behaviors. That's what their theory is mostly concerned with. And evolutionary frameworks are kind of built around this very reductive notion of behavior. So what's prominent is aggression, and aggression is often very legible, and it's easy to study it because it's kind of evolved to be blatant, in contrast to more subtle social interactions. Very much concerned with reproduction. So sexual selection, very popular topic because it can be linked to a functional bias. Are they foraging efficiently? Big question there. Now, again, in contrast, affiliation is more spread out. It was initially said, well, that's kind of epiphenomenal. It's above and beyond what we're interested in functionally. It's nice. Oh, they're nice, but that's for cute pictures. It's not adaptive. Or it's just a byproduct of their genetic relationship, kin selection, kinship, basically. Oh, it's just a kind of scaling up of genetics. Or, more, rudely, you're just projecting. You're just projecting onto these animals your social thing. So these are the biases intellectually. And then there are methodological challenges. It's more difficult to observe affiliative behavior. You need to be in the field for a longer period of time than just the mating season, for instance, or to see the seasonality of foraging. You have to be able to identify individual animals, and that's more challenging in some species. Horses are actually fairly easy. Squirrels are a little difficult, but it can be done. You need to be able to see their social order. You don't have to do social network analysis in a quantitative sense, but you do need to be able to think on that scale. And it's really important to have observations over the life course of an individual, as I'll explain in a minute. So this is not, simple at the methodological level, but if you recognize the constraints in advance, it's much easier to proceed. If you have a short time in the field and you're just doing these snapshots, you're probably going to miss it. And that's why a lot of ethologists miss these kind of affiliative behaviors. They're not there long enough. They're not looking at it. But if you think of those taxa that I highlighted at the beginning, these are all species that have a lot of affiliative behaviors, and it's very crucial to their process of social learning, the kind of learning that involves behaviors that get them into human-wildlife conflicts, etc. And so, here is kind of the payoff for doing this. And I'm just going to briefly reference. You see Jenny Tung, she's at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, a primatologist, an evolutionary biologist, and she's taking the lead. And this is where they, the natural scientists and ethologists begin taking sociality seriously when they recognize that there's a biological impact of the social. So she's making this statement, not just for humans, but for a whole range of species. And you can see them over here, from the horses and lemurs, the mongoose, the orcas, and dolphins, where they can very tightly correlate degrees of social integration and better health, in contrast to early life adversity, perhaps being orphaned and having weaker health outcomes. They ask, what's the biological process by which these social determinants of health function? But we can ask, well, how is this social world constructed? What's going on to constitute it socially and not simply reduce that to a biological function? So this is kind of where they take us a bit more seriously and where we can add something beyond the scope of what they are doing. So compiling life histories. This is the third chapter of the book, and this is what ethologists do, and they try to figure out the relationship between a habitat and its food resources, how that affects the behavior of the species, its reproductive strategies, its foraging techniques. In a traditional view, a traditional ethological view, this is just genes. It's just a fixed kind of instinct, gene-driven schedule of growth, very straightforward, and again, very reductive. Where this opens up is in the categories where we see evolutionary theory being reworked. And I will just touch upon this briefly. These are complex topics, but they're fairly basic. I think niche construction, we see a greater recognition now of the evolutionary impact of an organism modifying their environment to the extent that it's the environment that they're inheriting, that they've contoured, and not simply the sort of neutral background against which the reproductive strategies unfold. So something like life history is getting more interesting as evolutionary theory is getting reworked. The other concept here is cultural evolution, that what they learn socially actually alters their life history outcomes. And it's very similar to the point raised by Jenny Tung about the social determinants of health. So ethologists and natural scientists say, oh, right, this cultural evolution is inherited socially across generations and not reducible to gene-driven schedules of growth. So this is opening up at the theoretical level as well. This is an important concept, and you can see people who are working in cities taking it up. It's very insightful to understand how a species' life history shapes the way it's able to persist or adapt to urban environments. And I've got some articles here that are highlighted. I mean, excuse me, hyperlinked. And if you can't access them, please let me know. I'll be glad to send you copies. But you can see here just from the title, the urban tolerance, the ability to adapt to a city, is highly varied among avian species, and many of them are also quite engaged in social learning. Life history and nesting traits reflect their urban adaptations, their urban tolerances in coastal cities. So again, there's a lot of dynamism to this very standard unit of analysis, life history, particularly when you apply it to cities. And I love this one, snake life history traits, and they're associated with urban habitats in tropical cities. Snakes change their life histories or are more or less adaptable in urban areas based on them. And this is the really fascinating point. So we see evolutionary divergences at the genetic level as well as the behavioral level of species between the rural conspecifics out in the countryside and those that are in cities. And cities are where we kind of work best as ethnographers. Urbanization is altering social behavior of species. This is quite fascinating, and there's a lot to look at here. Social interactions change at multiple scales. For the individual level, the population level, the species level, there's a lot of change in behavior based on when a species enters an urban area. Given the diversity of animal social systems, all right, that's already quite interesting. Yes, as you would with human cultures, there's a lot of different social systems out there. What are the variations in across those different social systems? It's a very interesting observational question. These are observational questions, and I love this. The lizard, you don't think of them as social, but they become social when they move into cities. And this is in a biological journal. Urban lizards have more social connections, stronger associations, more association overall. Again, observationally. Urbanization can reshape social behavior, even in these grumpy, less gregarious species, the lizards. And it alters their social strategies, and that allows them to persist in cities. So again, all of these are observational projects and questions. Again, from another angle, the social is being taken much more seriously by natural scientists. And this is the title of this article in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. It's looking at social tolerance and seeing this as a distinct behavioral trait, and one that plays a crucial role in mediating group cohesion, facilitating behaviors like social learning and cooperation. So in the past, where the ethologists might have said, oh, you're just anthropomorphizing this social tolerance. No, it's quite legible. It's easily observed, and it impacts life history broadly. Culture may reduce social uncertainty. Yes, of course. Minimize conflicts, foster cooperation. All these create greater group stability. Well, we kind of know this about humans, but the natural scientists and ethologists are only learning this about their particular species, and this gives us an advantage in our greater range of comprehension of culture and how it works and its social impacts. This is building off of foundational work by Robin Dunbar, a British natural scientist who formulated theories around grooming and how in humans the physical contact of grooming is replaced by a language use, which fosters a similar kind of social cohesion to touch. So it's elaborating on the concept of a bonding mechanism, but less mechanistically. So, what opportunities are there? And I tried to answer this question myself by doing a little bit of online research. This isn't something that I know about personally or directly, but I found this, and it's an open access good journal, and it's on veterinary good medicine. This is the larger concern, but this is a project that they have going in of DAFA. You're looking at the variety of feral mammals that are found in this nature preserve Sierra de Guadalupe. There's of course a lot of dogs, but also a lot of cats, and they play a substantial role in the overall species configuration in this protected region. And it's a very interesting question the veterinarian group is facing. Well, how do you know they're feral versus just kind of recently escaped domestic dogs? And this is a behavioral question, observational question for that matter. They're more gregarious, robust bodies, etc. So there's an observational component to establishing what's happening in this preserve. And I'll just point out that feral species have been a highlight of some multi-species work. Anna Singh's Feral Atlas is a good touchstone. But in the Latin American context, I was just reading a manuscript about Ganado Cimarron in Uruguay in the 19th century, and the extermination campaigns on those cattle. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities here. What struck me about this project is that they already incorporate an ethnographic component, and it's not kind of a full-fledged ethnography, but they go out and solicit testimonies from the residents to understand the dog's behavior, what the dogs are doing. So this is a very nice model for where multi-species ethnographers can kind of latch on to what's going on and do it better, most likely. So here they're integrating testimonies with their own ethological observations, and they're combining these into an analysis of the dog's ecological roles. I think that this is a very exciting project. They find that you need to incorporate the feral fauna, the feral species, if you're going to do any kind of urban conservation strategies, because they're going to pop up. How do you control them? Well, first you have to observe them and figure out their social patterns and tendencies. And this is very significant. There's the threat of disease, the zoonotic transmission of disease. It's a public health concern. So there are stakes involved. There are high stakes here that I think speak to the importance of getting a multi-species ethnographer in the picture. And so what the veterinarian group did, they set up these camera traps, and that's very good, for getting kind of an isolated animal, but it doesn't catch their social activity. And this is where they turn into the more informal observations. They're doing the field work, and again, the local testimonies, and those produce much more robust observations of the social dynamics. So it goes beyond the mechanical version of what the camera traps can offer. The local testimonies convey a great deal about what these are doing, but not just the dogs, the fox, the possum, the livestock, ganado, etc. And they say, well, these are anecdotes. We've heard that before. Oh, it's an anecdote. Yes, but it's valuable. It's valuable. It contains ecological information, public health information, and ethnography is just a method of anecdote, one after another, and we can contextualize them effectively, so they carry greater weight with a different audience. Chareria, this is an article that was just published at the end of last year. It's a very interesting example of multi-species ethnography because it appears in the Journal of Contemporary Ethnography. You probably have not seen this, and this is more of a sociological journal than, say, an anthropological, cultural anthropology. But they're using James Scott's Weapons of the Week to talk about what the horses and bulls are doing in relation to the kind of activities of the chareria. Try not to say rodeo. say it in the American way instead of the proper way. But anyways, what and the authors specifically argue for a global South context in understanding what's going on with the power dynamics in these animal relationships. It's an ethnography. They draw upon my work in Peru and in Spain, and they say, here's how we can do these ethological observations. So it's an example of applying the techniques that I've been talking about today. It's certainly, not just me, it's out there. And I think it's particularly relevant in the Latin American context broadly. The importance, they say, of recognizing animal sociality and in its own terms, that they're social too, and that they can be the subject of social analysis. And as ethnographers, that's what we do best. We do it better than the ethologists, I think. We do it better than the natural scientists. And so this is what they are finding as well, this basic recognition of animal sociality. They are not simply representations of what humans want or desire or imagine. They have their own social dynamics. And when we incorporate that recognition into our ethnographic work, it really expands our scope of possibilities. I'll close by returning to the concept of animal cultures because I think it's so crucial, so significant. And I will highlight that this recognition is coming out of experimental settings, to test, to see that it's there. There's a great deal of rigor to it, but there's also a lot of inventiveness. Natural scientists trying to understand animal cultures put a lot of serious thought into how do we establish good, reliable data on that, and how do we go back and forth between in the wild and in labs. We see this, they're saying, across a huge diversity of behavioral domains. The scope is so broad that gives us many opportunities. You can talk about or observe it in foraging, tool use, particularly among primates. The vocal communication is vast, and it's very interesting that using artificial intelligence now, say with the cetaceans, with the whales, is opening up a greater recognition of the language-like capacities of those species. There are social customs, preferences, migratory pathways. There's a huge range of behaviors in which we can be doing observations. And it's recognized, there's a recognition that this is evolutionarily significant. This is fundamental. It impacts biology, as Jenny Tung's work shows. Whiten and company generate a set of cultural questions, and it's concerned comparatively with human culture, what's going on there. How does this shape the lifespan, the life shape of a particular species, and how they engage with their behavioral ecology, where are the differences between us and them? And all these are fine questions, and that shows the extent to which it's being taken quite seriously. But we, as social scientists broadly, as ethnographers, as anthropologists, as sociologists, will bring a different set of questions about the transmission of sociality. Questions that go back to Emil Durkheim. How is it that it impinges upon an individual? How does an individual come to feel the social, come to experience the social order? How are their behaviors shaped by that impact, that pressure, if you will, to get back to Karl Marx? Can't you feel it? It's this pressure, and what types of patterned interactions follow from it. So we can bring a wider set of cultural questions to bear on these observations, and I'll stop there.
Muchas gracias, John. Terminamos justo a la hora, a las 11, entonces tenemos una hora completa para la segunda parte de
Bien,
la sesión. We have
bien.
a full hour to listen to questions from the audience. And the mechanics of it will be that Anaid will be collecting anything that's written in the chat, in the Zoom call, or also people who might want to contribute something at the YouTube transmission. And I will give us that material. I will be reading. And as we agreed beforehand, we might be reading some of these interventions in Spanish, but we will try to translate if it's necessary. And you can respond to them in English. So, ¿quién se anima a comenzar? ¿Quién quisiera empezar con alguna pregunta o comentario, observación a la presentación de John? Bueno, mientras tanto yo puedo empezar si les parece, ¿no? Para no hacer silencios incómodos. So, bueno, lo voy a hacer en español, ¿no? John, si no me entiendes, me dices y cambio a inglés.
Bien,
Bueno,
bien.
a mí me pareció por demás interesante que en esta ocasión John nos está presentando pues un adelanto de un libro que está escribiendo, en el cual pues profundiza en estos puntos que ya había venido haciendo, por ejemplo, en el artículo de American Anthropologists, el que se llama Knowing Animals, Multiespecies Ethnography and the Scope of Anthropology, que, bueno, ya tiene algunos años de haber sido publicado este trabajo, fue publicado en 2021. Cuando yo lo leí por primera vez, pues me pareció justo, ¿no? Como una llamada a una especie de reforma de estos aspectos que conocemos desde hace algún tiempo, que tiene la antropología social cultural, pues en muchos países, México, por supuesto, no es la excepción, de rechazar justamente este acercamiento a las ciencias naturales, ¿no? El ámbito más común y conocido, pues es justo el que tiene que ver con aquello que denominamos evolucionismo, ¿no? Entonces, creo que en ese trabajo, John hace bien en recordarnos a la figura de Alfred Kroeber, pues uno de los estudiantes principales de Franz Boas, ¿no? Como uno de los responsables, ¿no? Llamémosle así, de esta separación, ¿no? En aquel clásico artículo que en principio, pues todo estudiante, toda persona estudiosa de la antropología debería conocer, el artículo llamado The Superorganism, que si mal no recuerdo, John, también fue publicado en American Anthropologist, ¿verdad?
Sí.
O sea, son dos artículos publicados en la misma revista con casi un siglo de diferencia, un poco más de un siglo de diferencia. Entonces, bueno, una cuestión que yo empezaría a poner sobre la mesa es ¿cuál ha sido la reacción de las personas que estudiando y enseñando también antropología social cultural y todavía, digamos, siguiendo este guión y esta tradición, este canon, ven una propuesta como la tuya donde estás diciendo básicamente que es necesario que el antropólogo multiespecie sepa etología, ¿no? Para poder observar la conducta animal e incorporar esos datos, pero también metodológicamente incorporar, pues, digamos, desestabilizaciones de la manera en que se analizan los datos antropológicos, ¿no? ¿Cuál ha sido la reacción que has tenido de tus colegas allí en Texas, en Austin en particular, o en otros foros, ¿no? Yo creo que ese es un tema de por sí interesante.
Yeah.
Luego, otra cosa que va un poco por ahí. You want to answer to that first?
Sí,
Okay,
por
good.
favor. Porque
Okay, go ahead.
hay muchas cosas. Thank you.
That's a big thing already.
Thank,
Okay,
thank,
great.
yeah,
Bring it on. Bring it on, John.
this is an excellent starting point. You get
Great.
back to Albert Kroeber and the foundation of anthropology, which is a rejection of an evolutionary perspective. And yes, this is
Yes,
characteristic.
because biology is
Yeah,
on
right.
something and culture is another thing. So
Yes.
there is a separation
Yeah.
ontologically, and
Yes.
then at the level of disciplines,
Yes.
biologists have to study their own thing, and then
Mhm.
anthropologists, especially social anthropologists, have to concentrate on culture, and
Yes.
that's it, no?
Yes, yes. That intellectual division of labor is actually what I thought I would talk about in this session
Okay.
today. My other book project is called Social Theory for Non-Humans, and it goes back to those founding gestures. Which were, quite important at the time, because evolution was being used in a very racist manner to argue that the Europeans are more evolved than everybody. They were getting Darwin badly wrong, basically. But I think that on one hand, Kroeber and Franz Boas and others overstated the case for the independence of culture. And we can see that now. It was partly polemical, it was partly intellectual. But as we look at our species facing global warming and rising temperatures that go beyond our body's ability to cool itself anymore, we see, oh, we're not entirely independent of evolution as we thought. So there's that, and then as I lightly touched upon with niche construction and cultural evolution, evolutionary theories getting more interesting, and it's taking into account the plasticity of species in a way that they couldn't see initially. So yes, in terms of how the reception from my colleagues, this is so important because it's actually why I'm able to do this. I'm in an anthropology department that has the traditional four fields. So there's a biology and sociocultural and archaeology and linguistics. And I spend most of my time talking with the biologists, my biological colleagues. And this has been over,
So
15.
biological anthropologists,
Yes,
you mean,
exactly,
right?
exactly. And one of the things I learned from them is that they say, well, we really don't think of instinct anymore. We can see these, creatures that have like, this massive, finger that's only used to extract out of one particular kind of fruit. But unless they see their parent doing it, they have no idea. They can't function. So instinct is getting much less emphasis. There's more focus on social learning. And but the other thing is, while I was working with the horses in Spain, I would come back from the field, and we would have workshops, and I would show some video footage, and I said, this kind of looks like boundary work, where one mare is staring at the others and scared, and they're like, yeah, that's boundary work. So the biological anthropologists are very welcoming. My social colleagues, they're dubious at best. I have been diligent in presenting these works at our national anthropology meetings, the American Anthropological Association, and over the last 5 years or so, and I don't see where it's made much of an impact. I think that it remains the methods that I highlighted at the beginning, the turn to the artful methods, or a really cumbersome way of trying to take analytics of representation and discourse and make them work. And I assume that it's some of the things that you mentioned. There's an institutional divide. And there's, and there's also like an intellectual anxiety about engaging the biological because of the battles that have been fought over eugenics. And frankly, those battles are being reemerging. We see a lot of eugenicist propaganda now in the States. And the ideas of sociobiology, you see them articulated with the kind of hyper masculinity of our current political regime. Eat meat, be a man. So all those battles are going to have to be refought, and that's a difficult environment to do something more nuanced. But I take it back to the slide by Jenny Tung, which she's able to show. And the interesting thing for me in that research is she says, well, we already know about the social impacts of health because of research done on humans. Like, oh, okay, so they're extrapolating that to other species. At the same time, they're like, okay, there's greater precision that we can bring to this research with other primates because they have shorter lifespans. We can observe them in the field in a way that we can't humans. And that those observations on primates can be then transferred back to make a stronger case yet for the social impacts of health on humans. So there is an intellectual traffic across the disciplines. So I mean, that's my response to your first question.
Great, John. This is getting really interesting. Thank you for sharing especially the last part, no, which has to do with something that's happening right now, no, and we were talking just before entering the Zoom call that some of these innovations in interdisciplinary dialogue are being threatened, no, by the political climate, no. So this is obviously important for everyone here. So there is already one question from the public. So in order for me to stop talking too much, I'm going to right away read this first intervention from Ischel Cosío Barroso. So I will read it in Spanish, ¿no? As we said.
Sí.
Ischel dice lo siguiente: ¿cómo tu propuesta dialoga con la propuesta de Donna Haraway sobre los humanos como cyborgs que se forman en colaboración con su entorno y la forma de construir conocimiento y la idea de mundo al respecto? Esa es una pregunta de Ischel. Y hay una segunda que llegó prácticamente de inmediato, es un poco más larga. ¿Quieres contestar a esta pregunta de Ischel, John? Sí. Adelante, por favor.
Sí. Gracias por su pregunta. Gracias. Donna Haraway was my mentor in graduate school. I was a student of hers in the History of Consciousness program, the University of California, Santa Cruz. I owe what I'm doing now to her. I will say that it took me a while to get there. So my first 2 decades of anthropology was all on race in the U.S., mostly race historically, culturally. It was only when I ran out of things to say that I realized, oh, well, I should engage in the science and technology studies angle about race, and that's all the genetics. And that's actually how I started working in Mexico. A good colleague of mine, Martha Menchaca, she said, oh, well, there's this human genome project in Mexico. You should go check it out. So that was my start. But your question specifically is about cyborg identity and the forming of relationships, mutual relationships, across very challenging boundaries of technologies and also of species. And what is important to understand about Donna Haraway is that her PhD was in biology. She began as a biologist. A lot of her theorizing comes from that. So it's not really necessary to kind of make her fit some of what I'm saying. It's kind of where I got it from. And what she was able to do in thinking first about cyborgs is to undermine the notion of the human as completely apart from things like evolution, apart from technology, this sort of unified being. And once you do that, then you can see relationships actually in a kind of evolutionary sense, where a lot of what we're doing is predicated on what's conserved relationally. So this might be too much, but it comes to mind. I'll go on. So I use a lot of the work of Irving Goffman, the sociologist Irving Goffman, about interactional analysis. Where respect and disrespect happen very rapidly with just eye contact. And I picked it up again because it was very useful with the horses. So the concept of civil inattention, they look but don't look, very, very complicated dynamic. I have noticed the last few years that my undergraduate students don't quite get it anymore. They they have trouble with the eye contact, maintaining it, breaking it off, and a lot of what they do with their devices, their phones, they say, I'm locked in, and so they don't have to engage even in looking around at you. So those kind of interactions where respect and disrespect happen rapidly are increasingly important to understand. And so when people like Kroeber and Boas said, okay, well, let's study the interesting stuff, language, etc., they overlooked that those exchanges, greeting rituals, are found in other species as well. And this is something that I have an online piece about animal rituals that gets into this. It's with Oxford Bibliographies, and I'll post that link. But when we see that, oh yes, baboons, for instance, very active and interesting forms of greeting rituals, jackals as well. We still retain that. And when we ignore it to, well, let's do discourse, everything that's really interesting, but when you watch our students starting to fumble with the basics of those interactions, you reckon, oh wow, they're so much more important than we realize, and they're important exactly in the ways I think Haraway highlighted when she's thinking about the relationships of the cyborg. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I think that was a very good initial answer to Ischel Cosio Barroso's question. So we will try to preserve the order in which the questions have been appearing. So the next turn will be for Brandon Chavira.
Yeah.
Brandon has written the question online, and I will read it. No, it is in Spanish again.
Sí.
There are a few more. Laura G. also has written something, and Noé Campos and Anaid Ortiz also has a couple of pieces of text, and also Octavio Corona will be next after I read these comments. So Brandon Chavira says, estoy de acuerdo en que los animales tienen múltiples formas de relación, tanto sociales, de conocimiento, morales o costumbres, tanto así que los biólogos han optado por dejar el laboratorio y adoptar el campo. En este punto me surge la duda de qué concepto de cultura o cómo se está entendiendo la cultura desde estas aproximaciones. Creo que un poco eso ya se mencionó durante la presentación, pero bueno, es la pregunta. Y dice, otra duda que va de la mano es que algunos autores en el pasado habían propuesto la llamada procultura en los animales. So, proculture in animals, o preculture maybe. Y no era aceptada. ¿Qué ha cambiado para adoptarla? Parecería que es por nuestro cambio de percepción y contexto que ahora se puede, entre comillas, ver la cultura en animales, plantas u hongos incluso, pero ¿qué tanto es realmente de ellos y no de nuestra visión sobre ellos a partir de cambios de percepción? Aquí me permito, I will allow myself to mention that this last piece of the question reminds me of the boom in the literature about fungi and the plankton
Yes, yes,
productions, no, that
yes,
are
yes, yes,
everywhere. No? So
yes.
I'm not sure if this goes into the question, but
Yes.
it
No, no,
sounds
no, no, it does.
similar to
Brendan, is Elios los animales or the natural scientists? De Elios, you know.
No, el ese ellos creo que se refiere a los investigadores, las
Okay,
personas
okay,
que
yeah.
estamos estudiando.
Investigadores. Bien, 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 bien.
Sí,
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you for this question. It's a very simple definition of culture that they are really are relying upon. And I'll read culture is all that is learned from others and repeatedly transmitted in this way, forming traditions that may be inherited by successive generations. So it's a very simple definition. The inheritance of any array of behavioral traditions through social learning. That's a very basic one. So right away we see the stark contrast that Francisco referenced initially. Krober's book had what 117 definitions of culture. You know, there's so many ways the social scientists have defined it, you know, to get more precision, et cetera. And then we kind of gave up on it, frankly. You know, my colleagues don't talk about culture anymore. They talk about what was highlighted in that slide. They talk about power. They talk about representations. You know, they don't want to talk about culture.
yeah. So would
And
you say that is the Geertzian way of thinking about culture that is predominant now when
I,
it comes to this concept that you're mentioning now, or is also other authors besides
it, it,
Clifford Geertz?
I don't know entirely. So that Geertzian notion of culture where there's text upon text and you're reading over somebody's back, and you know that has actually, I think, been left aside, at least in the U.S. for power and history. Power, power, power. You know, and you know that was necessary and important. Both, you know, Geertz and Irving Goffman had great limitations on that score. Particularly Irving Goffman. He didn't talk about race. He didn't, you know, talk much about gender. Most of those kind of power differentials. So it's a very basic concept of culture. I have a
So
definition.
it's more of a Foucauldian tradition then, perhaps, no?
Yes,
In
yes, yes.
relation to race, no?
That's what's more represented in cultural anthropology today. And you rarely see people making a cultural argument. Like when I do my introductory anthropology course, I find examples of culture being used in the popular media. Sports teams, we have to change the culture. The team is winning, the culture is good. The team's losing, the culture is bad. We got to change the culture. So, you know, people understand it still, culture of violence, culture, you know, etc. But cultural anthropologists largely gave up on that. But you know, it's come, I think, at a cost of intelligibility, accessibility of our writings, our ethnographies. I find it very difficult to assign an ethnography to my students, and you know, there's a variety of factors at work, but they all turn on being more elaborate than this basic definition of culture. The definition of culture that I come up with, and it's in one sentence, the capacity to perform and interpret social behaviors. And that's very, you know, more ample in the sense that it keys in on what we want to focus on, performing identities rather than being, fixed, and the interpretive work, meaning, basically. And so, different species don't have meaning in a linguistic sense, but they understand the meaning of particular behaviors, the eyes, etc. So, but then in terms of the protoculture, and why now? That's hard to answer exactly. You're right. There have been earlier efforts, basically, to make the case. I'll just say, simply for animal cultures. The evidence is just overwhelming now, I suspect, and it's also where it's much more interesting. They run out the natural scientists kind of run out of things to say about a species when you got its life history done. Well, it's done. Well, what else are they doing? Oh, well, then you get into, by force, social behaviors, activities, and I think that, as I suggested, evolutionary theory is being, well, people are arguing over revising it towards, niche construction and seeing the impact of culture. So there's a level of kind of, contestation over this. It's not like everybody agrees, but it is a well-established fact, at least, that, these species that I've been highlighting do have this basic capacity of plasticity of behavior that's going to be reflective of their social setting and what's happening there. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. I hope that answered it.
Excellent, John. Thank you very much. Also for bringing repeatedly the issue of the new perspectives, conceptually, especially theoretically, in evolutionary biology. That I particularly are completely on that side. I have contributed to some of that, but let's leave that for later. I will continue reading some of the questions.
Good.
The next turn is for the question of Laura G. And given that we are advancing in time, I will now read 2 or 3 comments in a row, and you will probably be able to answer more collectively, because some of the topics that follow will be interconnected. Laura G. dice: Hola a todas. Escribe Laura Guzmán desde Colombia. Agradezco mucho la presentación de John. Me gustaría preguntarle a John si tiene comentarios acerca del campo de estudio de animales en el trabajo. So, animals at work.
Yes.
Y o animales que trabajan.
Yes.
En segundo lugar, me pregunto cómo lidia él, o sea, tú, John, con las preocupaciones acerca del bienestar animal, animal welfare, que no necesariamente comparten las comunidades humanas con las que se encuentra en el terreno. Me imagino que aquí ella está pensando, pues, tal vez en los criadores de los caballos ibéricos, ¿no? Que, pues, tal vez no se preocupan demasiado de cuestiones bioéticas o de bienestar, ¿no? Voy a leer. Let me read just something else to complement. Voy a leer la primera parte de la intervención de Anaid, que creo que es muy interesante. Está conectada, yo así la veo con varias cosas que estamos diciendo, y la de Noé Campos, y ahí terminamos para oír la siguiente respuesta de John. Entonces, Anaid dice: el texto me parece que se refiere al de Knowing Animals, ¿no? El artículo que circulamos, el de American Anthropologist, muestra cómo el reconocimiento de cultura en otras especies permite ampliar el alcance de la antropología sin perder especificidad. Más que cuestionar esa categoría, me interesa pensar qué función está cumpliendo ahí. Y aquí viene la pregunta crucial. Entonces quisiera preguntarte, ¿dónde situarías el límite de lo multiespecies? Ese es Anaid. Y finalmente, Noé Campos, es una intervención breve, dice: gracias por la presentación. Mi pregunta es, ¿hasta dónde se puede considerar la diferencia entre antropología multiespecies y o antropología animal? Tú sabes, John, que hay algunas personas que hablan de anthropology.
Sí.
Entonces, ¿cuál sería la diferencia entre antropología multiespecies y antrozoología? Ahí nos quedamos.
Okay, bien, bien, bien. Voy a empezar. I'll start with the first question. From Laura. Laura?
De
No, no.
Laura, sí,
Laura, Laura,
sí,
Laura.
sí,
Yes.
correcto.
Um, um, uh, uh, Myself, I'm not directly involved in those kinds of studies about the working animals. I have there's a very good colleague in Sweden, Andrea Pettit, and she is she's doing that the Artful Methods book that I cited at the beginning. She did an ethnography of ranches in Colorado in the U.S. And so she has the triadic multi-species relation: the horse, the human, and the cow, the cattle. So it's a tremendous ethnography, and I will send you the reference for that. As far as animal welfare, that's where I would like to do more, but I'm probably just going. I have a chapter on that, and so in the in each chapter, I'm going to do a profile of a researcher, somebody who's actually out and applying these kind of observational techniques. And there are a couple of people, again, working in Europe, because the European Union regulatory framework is very robust, and there's ways to get involved there. And in both instances, overall, the sociality of those species matters a lot to the working real relationships, and you'll see that in that Chareria article, but also for welfare, the well-being. And this is, I think, an opportunity to get into where something's established as a criteria institutionally, financially, economically, and to say, well, yes, we can comment on the well-being, because for many species, most domestic species are social. Pigs, cows, horses, dogs. We wouldn't have domesticated them if they weren't social. So, it's a challenge to make a financial case, an economic case for the advantages of doing this. But when you see that animal well-being is negatively impacted in social terms, and that affects the financial outcome, well, then that's, I think a pretty good case. Um, so, um, Anaid's question next, yes? Or was there one in between?
Sí, si
Yeah,
tú quieres, podemos abordar lo que dice Anaí. De hecho, ella
yeah,
también hay una
yeah.
segunda parte que ahora si quieres la leo para recordar un poco. Ella dice,
Oh,
¿cuál es entonces el límite de lo multiespecie? ¿Está
yeah.
en el tipo de entidades que estudiamos o en las formas de observación que desarrollamos? ¿La cultura sigue siendo el criterio mínimo que sostiene lo antropológico o bien podríamos imaginar otros ejes como relacionalidad, semiosis, historicidad, ensamblajes? También pueden sostener esa especificidad. Y esto me recuerda a algo que dice Eduardo Kohn en el artículo este muy interesante de Annual Review of Anthropology sobre Anthropology of Ontologies, ¿no? Todas estas otras categorías que pueden ser también importantes o conceptos
Mhm.
para, digamos, sustentar el trabajo antropológico. Entonces, bueno, esa sería como el complemento de la
It's a very
intervención.
it's a very challenging question.
Sí.
Uh, I am unsure of the limits of the multi-species work at this point. I think it has the potential to get a wider audience. I think that it can fit very well in environmental anthropology. This is a kind of cross subfield. The limitations are the species themselves, the ones that we can access. It was fairly easy for me to work with horses because they're a very large mammal. They have very big eyes and very big ears. And so, okay, it would be much more difficult, with some species. So that's a limitation. And then, where do we fit kind of overall in cultural anthropology? You know, I will say quite honestly that the publisher, the editor who asked me to do this said, wait, I don't like this structure. You've got to make it more anthropological. Anthropology students aren't going to read this. So I went and found another editor. I went to Routledge, and they're like, "We love this book just the way it is. We want this now." So that shows you that there's a lot of boundary work going on, and that boundary work reflects the anxieties that we discussed earlier, and the turmoil of the moment, and the question of what's most pressing for our concerns. What should be the top of a cultural anthropologist's concerns is are animals? Why? I you know I had to realize that most people don't get into cultural anthropology to study animals. Those people have already gone somewhere else. So there's a kind of impatience I think I face. But again, getting back to Donna Haraway and what she's kind of shown us about the implication of the human in all of these other lives and beings. Yeah. And the second part of your question, yes, it's great. So no, we don't have to just say, here's culture and that's the limit. We bring everything else that you mentioned, the assemblages, the historical dimension. So in my class today, after this talk, the students have done their first reports on the species that they're studying, and it's a life history report, basically. But almost all of them highlighted habitat fragmentation, loss of habitat, climate change. All of those are historical developments, historical frames, and they're driven by direct or indirect human action. The idea of an assemblage, I think that's very important. Anna Singh, I think, did a very good job of theorizing the assemblage. So, where a natural scientist will, their tendency is to focus in on one species. Our tendency is to see assemblages and to see their, historical constitution. And semiosis is, obviously, more complex and nuanced in terms of human language. But like I mentioned, there's now, a lot about, biosemiosis. And this gets back to, Francisco mentioned the work on plants and their forms of sociality, which are very hard to access because they were mostly underground, the roots, the rhizomes, and or chemical, etc. So yes, I take your question to be, here's what else can we bring? We don't have to just say, oh, it's culture. We can do some of these more complex things. Thank you. And then there was a.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, the only one that was missing is the question by Noé, who was asking about the difference between multi-species anthropology and animal anthropology or anthrozoology, as some authors call it.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, and when I'm trying now to market and sell this book, I'm thinking about it a great deal because there are in the U.S. there are a number of animal studies programs,
Yeah.
anthrozoology, and you can get certificates in them, degrees, unlike multi-species ethnography. It's more established.
Yeah.
And those departments tend to be more biologically based.
Yeah.
But they consistently have at least one kind of social scientist in there who's doing this kind of stuff. So the main thing is to understand the translation process between the kind of the more bio-based anthrozoology. And the question of a hypothesis, the anthrozoology leans more. I might be misconstruing this. It could be more nuanced, but with the anthrozoology, you see a tendency towards, okay, well, we're going to use these methods and keep their analytical framework, whereas like an ethnographer will go out and we can generate hypotheses too, but they're going to look different and be answered in a different way. It won't be quantitative data. It'll be qualitative. It'll be more open-ended. I'm not sure I'm really getting to this well, but there's a lot of dialogue happening in these different institutional settings, and I will say that there's a lot of particularity to each kind of department. I've been researching the departments and the faculty that they have and their orientations. I can see some broad strokes and patterns, but there's a lot of people trying to sort out this question. Exactly. So that's my best, I think. Yeah.
Great, John. Thank you.
Mhm.
The next question will come from Octavio Corona, who has been waiting with his hand raised.
Thank you.
And there are 3 or 4 additional written questions.
Okay.
But let's hear Octavio first.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for your talk. It has been very interesting. I'm interested in the normative role of multi-species ethnography in the Anthropocene. When observing practices that involve like ecological damage or animal suffering, like cultural practices like charreria that you mentioned before,
Yeah.
or the management of invasive species,
Yes.
there is a implicit moral tension. So I want to know if you share with me the idea that multi-species studies often carry an implicit conservationist inspiration, or in that sense, do you see that the main goal of multi-species observation as facilitating conservation, or should it remain like purely descriptive,
Yeah.
like a descriptive practice?
Excellent question. And I'm unsure. Yes, I agree that there is an attention to the moral tensions in any kind of multi-species work, and that's far more pronounced than you would see in what an ethologist would do when you really try to bracket off the moral dimensions of what they're observing and what's occurring, and as you mentioned, with ecological damage and invasive species. For the second part, I I'm unsure in a couple ways. I do think that applying an ethnographic, a multi-species ethnographic approach to conservation settings is very valuable, and there's a lot of potential there, and that's kind of a way for us to get into to projects. But I would not want it to only be bound to that applied setting. The strength of ethnography, as I'm sure we all know, is its curiosity about the world. Its ability to just kind of plop down in a place and ask in a very open-ended way, what's happening here? What's going on? So I wouldn't want it to simply be rendered as an applied technique. I've put an emphasis on that in this presentation and the book because again, I think it's how we can get in and get more of an audience, but it should not just be rendered as applied.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias, Octavio. Bien, tenemos 4 preguntas de diferente longitud. Las voy a ir leyendo. La que viene a continuación por parte de Livia Ortiz 8692, que la escribió a través de YouTube y nos la compartió Alejandro. es la más complicada. Entonces, la voy a leer completa. Yo creo que ahí nos quedamos para que la responda John y luego tal vez podamos leer las siguientes de manera conjunta. Entonces, here it is, John, from Livia Ortiz.
Yeah.
In Spanish. El texto de Hartigan es una provocación totalmente. Al menos a mí me invita a cuestionar las bases del conocimiento social. Me surgen interrogantes sobre la dominación, la razón y la posibilidad de una relación no alienada con la naturaleza. El deseo humano de conocer, entre comillas, conocer la
Sí.
naturaleza ha estado ligado históricamente al deseo de, también comillas, dominarla. Al proponer que la antropología debe usar la etología, entre paréntesis, una ciencia biológica objetivista y basada en la observación de patrones para entender a los animales, ¿cómo evita su propuesta que la etnografía multiespecie se convierta en una nueva forma de, entre comillas, razón instrumental? Al hacer que el comportamiento animal sea legible y predecible mediante métodos científicos, vuelve a preguntar Livia Ortiz, ¿no estamos simplemente perfeccionando nuestro sistema de control sobre lo viviente en lugar de permitir que la alteridad animal nos interpele en o desde su propia diferencia? Muy importante pregunta, complicada. John, please.
Lo siento.
Should
No
I should
sigue.
I should I
Please,
translate some of it?
por
Of
favor.
course.
Say,
This is a very good question. So
I understood the beginning
right.
around
Yeah.
around nature and regulations of nature, and then I lost
Yeah.
the thread.
No
I'm
problem.
sorry.
No problem. No problem. So basically, Livia is recovering your proposal about the importance of ethology for multispecies anthropology. But she is characterizing ethology, I think correctly, as an objectivist science, no? Which is based on pattern observation of patterns
Yes.
for the understanding of animals. So she therefore asks you, how is it that you avoid that your proposal of multispecies ethnography turns to be a new form of instrumental reason? And I think she's probably now citing Horkheimer, right? And,
Yes.
the notions of the Frankfurt School about instrumental reason.
Yes.
And
Okay.
she continues.
Now I get it. Yeah.
When you make the animal behavior being readable or legible and predictable through the use of scientific methods, aren't we simply making it even more perfect or bettering our system of control over the living instead of allowing animal alterity to question ourselves as humans from its own difference? No? So I think it's really important.
Yes, it is.
Point, no?
It is. Thank you, Francisco, for translating.
No problem.
And Laura for posing it. The risks that you highlight are serious. The falling prey to a kind of objectivist sensibility, an instrumentalist standpoint, and which has led to the domination of nature. I'm going to go back to the talk very briefly to highlight this this slide, because I think that's what's kind of at stake here. On the left hand side, you see the kind of objectivist stance. Where did it go? I lost it. I lost my slides. Stop share. Where'd it go? You're the. I was trying to share. I was trying to go to the slideshow.
Share instead?
No, I was trying to get it. I was trying to go into into the slideshow, but it doesn't work very well. So here
there already.
There are all of those. Okay, the objectivist mindset, which exactly play into very functionalist concerns, etc. And so what I'm talking about is expanding and transforming observation. To not just be doing this in quantified form. So in my own field work, I didn't follow the kind of very detailed quantification of behaviors. I used an ethnographic approach. I'm seeing this. I would do focal animal samples and instantaneous samples, but always from a kind of ethnographic stance where I'm not reducing it down and I'm not trying to render it as something that would be operable in an instrumentalist sense. There's always going to be more to what the animals are doing than we can observe. I What I think is interesting is when we get the concept of the social and unmoor it from the human. Social theory has been entirely elaborated in relation to the humans, and now we begin to see, well, sociality in other species. This is a chance to kind of unhinge certainly the anthropocentrism around sociality. We're a hyper social species. Dogs are a hyper social species. We're aberrant, really, in terms of what we see of sociality in other species. So the kind of science side of this, that instrumentalist side, which has been fundamental to the kinds of domination in working animals and in animals in captivity that require welfare, is a risk. But if they're the only ones engaged in doing observational work or social analysis, then nothing will fundamentally change in how those structures of domination work. So that's my best response, but I don't know. It's a very serious concern that you raised. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, John. Definitely. We need to continue thinking about this particular point. So we have now contributions by Jennifer Rivas Illescas, Taku Chakrabarti, Miguel Vázquez y finalmente Johannes Neurath. Entonces vamos a leer estas 4, las voy a leer en dos pares, si te parece bien. Primero 2, John, contestas, y luego las últimas 2, porque ya nos aproximamos a la finalización de la sesión. Entonces, para que podamos contestar correctamente estas 4 preguntas,
Bien,
¿no?
bien.
Entonces, empiezo. Muy bien. Empiezo por la de Jennifer.
Tengo que salir a las 12.
Luego, claro, sí, ya
Sí.
nos avisaste. Entonces,
Sí.
me apuro. I'll get to it now.
Lamentable.
No problem. Jennifer asks her question in English. I would like to inquire about the nature of community engagement. For example, in my experience in Ciudad Valles, San Luis Potosí, local communities often view feral dogs as a risk, frequently desiring their removal. Given this context, did you find tension between the community's opinions about feral fauna and your own ethnographic focus on multi-species coexistence? And if it was the case, how did you manage those conflicts? Taku Chakrabarti pregunta, en Knowing Animals, referente al artículo que ya hemos mencionado, hablas de los reduccionismos en los dos lados de la brecha disciplinaria, ¿no? Biología cultura o antropología social, antropología biológica. Tanto de ver a los animales como máquinas que obedecen instintos preprogramados en la etología y de convertirlos solo en símbolos, objetos de prácticas y significaciones humanas, por ejemplo, antropología cultural a la Gertz. Para contrastar el primero, afirmas la plasticidad del comportamiento animal, su sociabilidad, capacidad de aprendizaje, etc. Y para contrarrestar el segundo, propones acudir a la observación empírica. Pero en términos metodológicos, ¿cómo se da el salto de la observación a la interpretación, de los datos a los significados? ¿O ya no aplica esta distinción? Y creo que la última, pues ya se ha abordado, que es cómo conceptualizar las culturas animales en sus propios términos. Esas son las 2 preguntas penúltimas.
Okay.
Should I translate
no,
something?
no, 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 no.
Okay.
Jennifer. Uh, the work I have only done this work with the communities in Spain, and they were very integrated with the wild or feral horses, and they were the ones engaged in maintaining them. With the feral dogs, I understand what you're talking about. They're dangerous. They're a threat, and the community sees them as such, and that's also, I think, the case with the communities around Sierra de Guadalupe, and that's a complicated situation, and I don't know that I have more to say, kind of intellectually about that, but it's one where we need to be cautious in how we interact with these with 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 these species. As far as making the leap from data to interpretation, um, uh, for ethnographers, it's not a huge challenge. You know, we we kind of, oh yeah. So the natural scientists will say, well, that's an anecdote, okay, and that's fine. We're I I think the openings are, and this gets back to Anaid's comment. Um, the spaces where I work, like with the horses or other feral spaces, like on a thing, are locations that the natural scientists don't want to go because it's already disturbed. It's already disturbed. There's nothing natural about it.
Mhm.
But that's where the species are today. They're habitat fragmentation, contamination, pollution, climate change, all of these things that disrupt the natural order, and they're create precarious situations. And this gets back to, I think, to Octavio's question about the moral imperatives to act, and that's a case where the relationship of data to interpretation might end up being more fluid because of the pressing concerns. Um, what we say is, animal culture, again, it's very well established by natural scientists, and they're quite comfortable in drawing these conclusions. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I think that's what you're asking. Yes, Haku? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. John, so
Yes.
to respect your time
Yeah.
also, I'm going to go now to the last two
Okay.
contributions. Miguel Vasquez raises a question, and Johannes Neurath has a comment, which is
Okay.
also an important comment,
Yeah.
and that will be probably the last
Okay.
part that we can read,
Good.
and we will be probably finishing on time, just in time.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Miguel Vázquez escribe lo siguiente: ¿cómo se articula la problemática multiespecies con el relativismo cultural? Primero, en términos de observaciones y posteriormente en términos teóricos. El
Ajá.
relativismo cultural, nos dice Miguel, habla de que la reproducción humana no es a nivel de especies. Entonces, ¿qué tipo de observaciones tenemos al momento de cruzar ambos enfoques? Podemos hablar de relaciones multiespecie o de culturas multiespecie, retomando, por ejemplo, a los caballos y su distinta forma de doma, tanto en México como en el mundo. Y Johannes Neurath se conecta en su comentario con algo que dijo Livia antes, de hecho la va a citar, dicen Johannes: creo que es importante practicar la antropología interespecie desde una posición muy crítica a Occidente, lo pone entre comillas,
Sí.
y tomando en serio, por ejemplo, culturas amerindias,
Ah.
donde si se matan animales, sí se matan animales, pero no se niega que los animales sean personas. Si
Mm.
no cuestionamos el naturalismo occidental, Livia va a tener razón, es decir, el comentario previo. Y solamente vamos a mejorar o perfeccionar la explotación de los no humanos.
Mm.
tenemos todavía 2 minutos para ti,
Sí,
John.
sí, bien, bien. Ah,
Gracias, me
sí,
adelanto. Ha sido excelente sesión, muy disfrutable. Muchísimas gracias. Adelante.
it's been very enjoyable for me. I feel energized by these conversations.
It's been
Much
great.
more interesting than with some of my colleagues here in the U.S. I think a lot about the culture of relativism because I teach an intro anthropology course, and for the question here, it kind of went away, I think, in the U.S. The idea of cultural relativity. When we began, working on race and cultures of racism, you can't be relativistic about that. And this might be one of the reasons why culture kind of dropped out as an analytic because of that relativistic idea that you can't judge one culture over another. When we went to power history, it's very judgmental. Um, you do, but the fact that you do see that variation in animal behavior, by country, by region, etc., points to the enduring kind of relevance or pertinence of a relativistic view. I will say I was just reading Ed Young. He's a science writer. He wrote this book, The Immense World, and it's about the sensory capacities of all these species. And he's going around the world, and I'm reading, I'm like, this is like reading cultural anthropology 40 years ago. Oh, here, in Spain, they do it this way. Here in Nigeria, they do it that way. So there's something analogous to these kind of the balancing of views through a relativistic framework, and the founding sensibilities of cultural anthropology. And I'm sorry,
No
John,
problem, John.
if
Thank
you
you
want
very
to
much
send me
again.
send me these questions and
Of
I'll answer.
course, we will keep in
Thank
touch. We will
Yes,
continue
please,
talking and
please,
expect from us some emails to continue the conversation.
please.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you
We
all
will
so
remain.
much.
We will remain a few minutes.
Okay, yes, good,
Don't
good.
go.
I have to go. Yes, bye bye.
Yes. Bye. Bueno, pues terminamos justo a las 2 horas, pero creo que nos toca un pequeño cierre, ¿no? De mi parte, estoy realmente feliz, muy contento. Prácticamente no tuvimos problemas técnicos. Muchas gracias a las personas que nos apoyan en la parte técnica de las infraestructuras digitales. Y preferiría, pues con esta felicidad, regresarle la palabra a Anaid para que nos conduzca hacia el final formal de la sesión. Por favor, Anaid.
Me parece que fue una muy buena primera sesión, ¿no? Con la ponencia de John, tenemos una muy buena entrada para iniciar nuestro seminario, ir marcando rutas, intereses. Creo que hubo bastantes participantes, o sea, las participaciones fueron en realidad bastante profundas, ¿no? Y entonces eso llevaron a unas respuestas amplias. Creo que es bueno que sigamos conservando la interacción por medio del chat, ¿no? Para poder dar lugar a más preguntas, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, creo que podríamos estar aquí unos 5 minutos más si alguien quisiera tener algún comentario o algunos minutitos. Ujú.
Sí, Alejandro, no sé si tú quieras decirnos algo.
Sí, brevemente, pues bienvenidas, bienvenidos a todas, a todos, a todes. Sí, pues es un súper inicio del seminario coordinado por Anaid. Creo que podemos justamente tener estas formas de, de reflexión. Acuérdense que va a estar el video en YouTube, en la página de la UAM Iztapalapa, para que se pueda replicar, para que puedan compartirlo y que, pues justo que en esta parte de reflexiones vayamos ampliando el nivel y afianzando el nivel que se presentaron en los dos eventos anteriores y en este nuevo espacio que me parece que es fundamental, ¿no? Entonces, también yo creo que la próxima vez ya en las conversaciones pueden prender sus cámaras, ¿no? No sean tímides, ¿no? Es así para que haya una interacción un poquito más sin tantas cuestiones ocultas, ¿no? Muchas gracias.
Sí, queremos que sea un ciclo, un seminario amigable y pues constructivo en todos sentidos, ¿no? De conexión de perspectivas y de construcción de redes de investigación y de colaboración tal vez incluso, ¿no? Eugenia, ¿tienes algún comentario? Tú eres también muy importante aquí. Te queremos
Muchas
escuchar.
gracias, muchas gracias. Bueno, me quedé con las ganas de preguntarle a John sobre las relaciones de parentesco o el tropo que si los animales forman parte de las familias, ¿no? Que es lo que estoy trabajando. Pero bueno, no lo hice porque justo quiero aprender cuáles son las inquietudes de todo este grupo y he aprendido muchísimo de todas sus preguntas y bueno, la presentación de John ha sido increíble y reconozco muchísimo el trabajo que está haciendo Anaid y acompañada por Francisco y por Alejandro. Muchas felicidades.
Gracias, Eugenio. Anaí, no sé si quieras hacer el anuncio de la siguiente sesión. Tal vez pueda ser un buen momento ya para finalizar. Alguien nos comenta un poco en ese sentido. Victoria Molnar recomienda que para la próxima, además de avisar la semana anterior, enviar un mensaje de correo electrónico el mismo día. O sea, cuestiones de recordatorio y programa. No sé si quieras mencionar algo como coordinadora.
Sí. Bueno, la siguiente sesión será el 25 de marzo, en el mismo horario, de 10 a 12, en nuestra zona horaria de Ciudad de México. Está aquí presente Johannes Neurath, que será el ponente de la siguiente sesión. Estamos pendientes de circular el texto que nos va a convertir. Trataremos de hacerlo llegar al menos con una semana de antelación. Ya iremos viendo y pues bueno, vamos a tomar en cuenta esta cuestión de recordarles la sesión, pero sí también quisiera exhortar a los que no entraron y pudieran ver este video después, pues que sí hay un compromiso, ¿no? Porque se realizó una inscripción, se cerró la inscripción, entonces pues hay gente que quiso inscribirse después de que la inscripción fue cerrada y ya no la pudimos abrir porque, bueno, sería inmanejable, ¿no? Tener a más de 100 personas aquí, incluso a 100 personas sería muy complicado. Entonces, pues yo sí los quiero exhortar a que las personas que se hayan inscrito, pues asuman el compromiso de ingresar a las sesiones, dado que pues han ocupado un lugar, digamos, en la inscripción. Sería todo por mi parte, Francisco. Gracias.
Gracias a todas las personas que nos acompañaron. Un fuerte abrazo de mi parte. Ya se quitó un poco el frío. Hasta la próxima.
Felicidades.
Gracias. Chao.
Gracias, chao.